Climb it up.
America is turning 7 up.
I love him anyway. And here's Rod Stewart.
Hats off to Breck, because clean body really lasts. Hats off.
Changed. New improved Listerment. Tastes as good as it works.
For people who can choose anything they want and they choose the best.
Datsun offers Black Gold. The 10th anniversary Datsun 280ZX. Very few will possess its limited number. So lavishly appointed, there are virtually no options. The 10th anniversary 280ZX is Datsun, driven to the ultimate.
The 280ZX represents a transitionary period for the Z car. Transition from 1960s engineering to 1980s engineering. The transition from pure sports to sports luxury. The transition from natural aspiration to forced induction. The transition from being Mr. K's pet project to being developed without his guidance. The transition from the Z to the ZX. The 280ZX emerged as Nissan's response to 1970s automotive malaise. But that pushback was frustrated by continued government regulation, new American competition, and former faithful Z-car allies who rejected the direction this new generation was taking the model. Nissan faced an uphill battle, challenged from all sides, and sometimes from within, to keep the Z-car alive. Today, the S130 seems like an obvious solution to the problem Nissan was facing in the mid to late 1970s. But this was not always the case. Unless Nissan delivered a smash hit, and we're talking about record-breaking sales here, the 280ZX was going to be the last Z car. Do we consider the 280ZX a smash hit today? Probably not. But maybe we should, because it did break records that stand to this day. My name's Rick Pierce, and I'm a car nerd that loves history and wants to share some car history nerdery. In today's episode, we'll dive into the development of the 280ZX, its notable features, and its legacy. Welcome to Make and Model. Let me ask you this. It's 1975 and you're Nissan Motor Company. You've just released the 280Z, and knowing that developing a new car takes several years, you begin to plan the next generation of the Z car now. This will be a Z car for the 1980s. It needs to be modern. No, not just modern. Futuristic. And flashy. People love flashy. You've already built a Z car with 2.4 liters and 2.6 liters, and now you've just released one with 2.8 liters. The next possible step? Duh, it's obvious. 3 liters. But you also need to give it a new name that exemplifies sports and luxury. The epitome values of a grand tour, which is how you're going to market this car. Well, the Z was already sporty, so the Z can stay. How to add that touch of luxury? It's right there in the middle of the word itself. X. Everyone knows that X means classy. It's 1975 and you're Nissan Motor Company, and you've just outlined the concept for your next Z car, the 300ZX. Except developing a new car from the ground up is going to take more time than you have to get that car to market. The 300ZX is just going to have to wait. Enter the next best thing, the 280ZX. Yutaka Katayama, president of Datsun America, known colloquially as Mr. K, was an instrumental part of the Z car's development, butting heads with Nissan management back in Japan so that they would fund the car's creation and encouraging the design and engineering teams to come up with something that would captivate the American market. Mr. K had a lot of faith in Yoshihiko Matsuo, head of Nissan Styling Studio No. 4, who was the chief designer for the S30. But as we learned in the last episode of this series, Mr. K had just been ousted from his job as president of Datsun America. One of his last official acts was the push for Matsuo and his team to continue development of the next generation of the Z-car. Without Mr. K, however, Matsuo knew the biggest Z-car cheerleader was gone, and he'd be going forward alone. Grand Tourers began growing in popularity during the 1950s, taking sporty coupes and adding comforts to make what were effectively luxury sports cars. The GT moniker can be a little hard to define, as the generally agreed upon definition is bent or even misused completely. It gets fuzzy. Typically, a GT car is a fast coupe that has style and comfort. Is the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL a Grand Tourer? Obviously yes. Is the Volkswagen Golf GTI a Grand Tourer? I think that would be a lot harder case to argue, even if the GT in GTI literally means Grand Tourer. The term is a loan phrase from the Italian Gran Turismo, which we sometimes also use instead of saying Grand Tour or Grand Touring. You might recognize the phrase as the title of an incredibly popular racing game series. It's at the edge of this fuzzy definition that Nissan found themselves when trying to market the Z-car. Mr. K had advocated that the Z-car was a Grand Tourer right from the start, and the advertising reflected this in fairly plain terms going back to the very first 240Z ad in 1969. But the public and press pushed back on it being a Grand Tourer, falling in love with it as a pure sports car. The push for it to be a GT never went away though, and why would it? This was Nissan's halo car. It was supposed to be everything. Fast, stylish, luxurious. A halo car at an affordable price? Even in the 1970s, it was a pretty radical idea. Mr. K knew that if they could get it just a little more luxurious without bumping up the price too much, there would be no question that the Z-car was a true GT car. Comforts like smooth shifting automatics and power windows added weight, which reduced overall performance. But for Mr. K, it was worth it. This might sound a little appalling to us today, and Mr. K is revered in the Z-car community, of which I have no plans to besmirch his name. So let's take a step back and try to look at this through a couple of lenses. The first lens is the modern one. We exist in a time where sports cars have started to dwindle. Very few entry-level options exist, and of the vehicles that might meet the definition of Grand Tourer, most have become supercars, or hypercars, neither of which are exactly common on the streets. As sports car fans today, we long for the enthusiast market where sports cars, while not common, weren't exactly uncommon either. Any effort to jeopardize that is unimaginable given how rare sports cars have become. But that's exactly the kind of market that Nissan found themselves in the 1970s. So let's take a look through the second lens, the 1970s lens. Regulatory requirements are already frustrating performance output, and the general public consensus is one where everyone deserves a little luxury. From the type of fabric your clothes are made of, to the smoothness of your cigarettes, to the technology in your car. It's the 1970s, baby. Writer and journalist Tom Wolfe described the baby boomer young adults of this era as the me generation for a reason, and their purchasing power was only growing. We've already established that the task given to the Z-car team by Nissan management was to create a record-selling new model. So it makes sense that they try to capture what consumers of the time wanted, disregarding the wishes of those of us from the 2020s might have. What Nissan really needed were some specifics, and they plan to get them. The very first thing Nissan did when beginning development of a second-generation Z-car was to put Americans who already had a Z-car into a room and find out what they liked, what they didn't, and what they should change for the next version. The future of the Z-car will be decided by focus groups, and I bet you can guess how it went. Americans told Nissan management they liked the power and performance, the sportiness and styling, the way the car turned heads wherever it went, even after all these years. But Americans also told them that they generally use the Z-car as their primary mode of transportation, shuttling families around and getting groceries and commuting. It needed to be economical and good for the environment. They wanted a sleek, no-frills, pure sports car experience, and something that could be used in professional racing. But they also wanted a luxurious road throne that they could replace their family sedan and get great gas mileage. As an American, I get it, but also, Nissan didn't push back. If that's what consumers wanted, that's what they planned to deliver. It was the Japanese way. They graciously accepted the focus group's insights and went back to Japan. Management took their notes and put them on Matsuo's desk. He understood the assignment he'd been given, and its impossibility, and got to work. The design team quickly began iterating through sketches and scale clay models to use in wind tunnel testing. It's these wind tunnel tests where the design team spent most of their time, working to reduce the 280ZX's drag coefficient. Drag coefficient would be the reason that Proposal B, the version with pop-up headlights, was knocked out of contention, but not before designers fought long and hard for those pop-ups. New reiterative sketches of the final designs resulted in new clay models that then resulted in full-size models that finally resulted in prototypes. It was important for the design team to carry over key features of the S30 to the S130, namely a sporty coupe with a long hood in both a 2-seat and 4-seat model. Inside, the 3 gauges above the center console were now considered iconic and had to be kept. After the pop-up headlight team lost their battle, sugar scoop headlights were carried over for their aerodynamics. But there were changes. The B-pillar and rear quarter windows were enlarged to improve visibility. And more angular styling created creases along the edges of the car. The 280ZX was starting to literally take shape. The change from Z to ZX was not the only name change happening at Datsun dealerships. Without an official announcement, a new name began to appear on the back of American Datsuns: Nissan. Rolled out across most car models in 1978 for the 1979 model year vehicles, the badges continued to say Datsun, but also had a smaller addition below that said, "By Nissan." Astute Datsun customers had noticed the name Nissan on their engines and identification plates for years, with a few coming to the understanding that Nissan was the vehicle's builder, or it was the parent company, or Nissan meant Datsun in Japanese, or Nissan was the parts supplier, or Nissan definitely had something to do with Datsun at some point in the production or delivery or sale of Datsuns to Datsun dealerships around the country. Almost assuredly. As we discussed in episode 1 of this series, the name Datsun had been coined for the export markets, such as the United States, to protect the Nissan brand name if the experiment to sell cars in those markets, such as the United States, didn't work out. They could close up shop, retool their efforts, and re-enter the market under the name Nissan, or some other name, a few years later, and no one would be the wiser. It seemed like a good plan in the 1950s when Nissan came up with it. They watched what happened to Toyota's first effort in America, the Toyo Pet Crown, and breathed easier knowing that Americans wouldn't have the slightest idea what a Nissan even was. Until they wanted Americans to know what a Nissan was. The experiment had been a success, and not one it seems Nissan actually expected. They had sold millions of Datsuns to Americans who wanted more and more Datsuns. Nissan was one of the largest Japanese automakers in the world, and no one in America even knew who they were. So management began asking the question, how do we rebrand? They decided on a 3-phase process that would take approximately a decade. The first phase would be to start introducing Americans to the Nissan name by putting it right on the badges of the Datsuns they love so much. These Datsuns? They were by Nissan. Nissan made them. It couldn't be stated more simply. In 1978, when these badges began appearing on dealership lots, less than 1% of Americans had even heard of Nissan. 3 years into the rebranding's first phase, halfway through the 280ZX's life cycle, that number had increased to, well, it was still less than 1%. Nissan had some work to do, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's take a closer look at the 280ZX, even its badges, and see what makes it so special. The Datsun 280ZX, also known by its model name S130, was the second generation of the Nissan Z car. In Japan, it was called the Nissan Fairlady Z, and in other export markets, it was called the Fairlady 280Z or 280ZX. The S130 is a front-engine, rear-wheel drive FR coupe that, like its predecessor, came in two body styles, a 2-seat 2+0 and a 4-seat 2+2. And like its predecessor, the 280ZX was powered by the L28E straight 6 that produced 135 horsepower. This number is different than the last reported 170 horsepower in Episode 3, due to Nissan adopting the SAE net power measurement standards in 1978. Using that standard, the previous 280Z would have produced 136 horsepower. Like Nissan and other automakers of the time, we'll be using these SAE standards going forward. Unlike its 280Z predecessor, the S130 was an all-new chassis and shared almost no other parts beyond the engine with the outgoing model. It did share a few components, such as suspension and steering, with other Nissan vehicles like the Bluebird and 810. The 2-seat 280ZX was 174 inches long, 66.5 inches wide, and weighed approximately 2,850 pounds. The 4-seat model added an extra 8 inches in length and almost 150 additional pounds, coming in at just under 3,000 total. Like the previous generation, the S130 had sugar scoop headlights. As an option, customers could also include headlight washers, which were a popular European-style feature at the time. The easiest way to identify a 280ZX is by the closed front grille, similar to the S30's G-nose style grille. By having the hood meet the front bumper, Nissan improved downward force and decreased drag coefficient. The second easiest way to identify a 280ZX is by the rear quarter window, which did away with the upward sweeping slope and was now squared off, at least on the 2+0 models. 2+2s had an elongated downward sloping rear quarter window that met at the fender line. This was a preview of things to come for the Z car, as the next generation used the same styling. Both the 2-seat and 4-seat 280ZXs had prominent B-pillars, either in chrome or black plastic depending on whether the car was a special edition or had an optional blackout package. The rear badges on all 280ZXs sported the By Nissan phrase. Lastly, all models had a new standard-equipped rear windshield wiper. Inside, the 3 pod gauges above the center console were carried over. A V-shaped 2-spoke steering wheel was introduced, and new standard options included a digital pre-flight check screen and cruise control. For 1980, the 280ZX was offered with a new T-bar roof that added 2 removable glass panels that could be stowed in the rear hatch. Aftermarket suppliers had been offering T-top modifications to Z cars for years, and Nissan was eager to capitalize on this growing interest. Structural integrity of the chassis didn't allow for the S130 to be offered as an open-top convertible or target top, but a T-top solution had been engineered by strengthening the central support between the A and B pillars. The T-top turned out to be incredibly popular, and most 280ZXs sold after 1980 included the T-top option. As a result, quote, slick-top 280ZXs are now considered rare and desirable, especially because of their lighter weight. To add additional power that would offset extra weight, Nissan had been developing forced induction systems, but were not ready to release it when the 280ZX debuted. Quite frankly, they still weren't ready when they began offering the turbocharger for the 1981 280ZX, but they began offering it nonetheless. The L28ET bumped the horsepower up from 135 to 180, and dropped the 0 to 60 time down from 9.1 seconds to 7.4 seconds. It was an impressive improvement, and it allowed Nissan to claim the title of fastest import sold in the United States. But it was only offered on automatic transmissions. The turbocharged engine produced too much torque for the manual gearbox, and Nissan decided to only sell turbo automatics the first year they were offered, which understandably was not super well received. Turbocharged models also added power-assisted rack and pinion steering, and the rear springs were stiffened to combat complaints that the car felt too soft. The 1982 model year was a facelift year for the 280ZX. As a result, the 82 and 83 280ZXs are known as Series 2 S130s. The facelift itself consisted of revised B-pillar garnish, body-colored bumpers, and new taillights. Turbo models also got new 15-inch 4-spoke alloy wheels. The power-assisted rack and pinion steering and rear springs were carried over standard to all models, not just turbos, and new NACA ducting was added to reduce overheating. As optional items, there were some improvements to the interior as well. These included a very 1980s digital dash and voice warning system. The voice warning system is affectionately known as Bitchin' Betty.
The left door is open. left door is open.
and is voiced by Leslie Shook, who also did the voice warning system for the McDonnell Douglas F-18 Hornet. And now you'll know why your car is telling you your altitude is too low. There were two special editions of the 280ZX offered. The 10th anniversary edition was released for the 1980 model year, celebrating, and this might be very obvious from the name, the 10th anniversary of the first Z car's release in 1970. This edition is sometimes called the Black and Gold edition because the 10th anniversary cars featured two-tone paint. While 3,000 10th anniversary edition cars were released, only 2,500 were black and gold. The other 500 cars were black and red. The 10th anniversary edition cars had leather interiors, tinted T-tops, hi-fi stereo systems, and gold or black wheels. The second special edition 280ZX was a little bit rarer. Everyone's heard of the Skyline GTR. GTRs are one of the most legendary cars of all time, and one of Nissan's most popular models. The R32 was nicknamed Godzilla because it was a monster that couldn't be beat on the track. I can't wait to do a series on the Skyline one day to tell you all about it. So everyone's heard of the GTR, but have you ever heard of the ZXR? Introduced with the 280ZX's launch, the ZXR was a special performance model of the 280ZX. But calling it a performance model might be overselling it a bit. It had the same engine under the hood and the same options as a regular 1979 280ZX. And it produced the same power, so nothing incredible there. But what it did have, besides awesome tritone stripes down the sides and hood, was one hell of a wing. Nissan needed this wing for its SCCA racing competition entry, and the rules required that vehicles entered in SCCA competition be manufactured and sold to the public as homologation specials. At least 1,000 had to be made to qualify. So to get the wing on their SCCA car, Nissan produced 1,000 big wing 280ZXs, 1,009 to be exact, and called them ZXRs. These cars are incredibly rare today, with folks trying to track down and catalog the ones that have survived. For 1970, the first year that the Z car was offered in the United States, it sold approximately 16,000 units. From that time onward, it generally trended up, with more than 30,000 Z cars sold in 1971 and hovering between 45 and 55,000 between 1972 and 1977. Unusually, the last year the S30 was offered, 1978, sales finally broke 60,000 units for the first time. The S130 development team had been put under a lot of pressure to deliver a second-generation vehicle that would continue to sell well. It was probably with great relief when the 280ZX was released and Americans couldn't buy them fast enough. Sales hit 50,000 units and kept growing. That relief turned into elation when sales hit 60,000 units. And then jubilation when they reached 70,000. The 280ZX had officially become the best-selling Z car of all time. But it didn't stop. The 1979 280ZX finally sold an unprecedented 86,000 units. That was 20,000 more Z cars than the previous model year, which had been a best-selling year. And then Motor Trend named the 1979 280ZX its Import Car of the Year, cementing its legacy as one of the best Z cars of all time. Right? Well, about that. Sales slowed for the 1980 model year, largely due to the pushback we discussed earlier. Even a high-profile celebrity ad campaign featuring Apple co-founder Steve the Woz Wozniak didn't seem to help sales, at least outside of some Dungeons & Dragons circles. The 1981 model year saw a resurgence in sales for the car when the turbo model was released, but the damage to the name had been done, and by 1983, the last year of the 280ZX, sales were back to hovering around 55,000 units. Still, the development team had broken records and picked up awards, which at least ensured that Nissan would develop a third generation of the Z car. But the 280ZX had been largely relegated, and I believe unfairly, as a footnote of Z car history. Despite the public's initial excitement and then disapproval of the 280ZX, The car was built for racing, and racing it went. It was used by a number of high-profile racing teams, all featuring the ZXR's whale-tail wing, including Bob Sharp's. In 1979, actor Paul Newman, that's right, the salad dressing guy, won the SCCA C Production Class Championship driving a 280ZX. Newman got involved with Sharp's team while learning how to race at the Watkins Glen Racing School during the filming of Winning in 1968. Though he drove many cars, including a Porsche at Le Mans, it would be the Datsun 280ZX and 300ZX that would define his career. But Bob Sharp's team wasn't the only one that had success with the 280ZX. The red, white, and blue Electromotive number 83, driven by Don Davendorf and Tony Adamowicz, came in first at Road America Pabst 500 in 1980 in an upset win that put the team on the map. Electromotive took the IMSA GTU Class Championship for 1979 and 1980, and then the GTO Class Championship in 1982 and 1983. And I'm failing to mention all the lap and course records that they broke. Modifying the engine and adding a turbocharger resulted in 580 horsepower at the wheels. The team would continue to develop the car and continue getting wins. By 1983, the Electromotive 280ZX Turbo produced almost 700 horses and took first at Brainerd, Sears Point, Portland, and Road America. Tony Adamowicz said of the 1983 season, "We won GTO IMSA convincingly and raced against the overall class, often beating twin-turbo Porsche 935s. It was awesome racing this car." Of the Z cars to bear the name Datsun, the 280ZX is probably the least well known today. Surprising, considering that more than 330,000 were sold in North America over the course of its 5-year run. For comparison, that's twice the amount of 350Zs that were sold, and 350Zs were sold for 8 years. Just taking a quick look at the Instagram hashtag 280ZX will show you what I mean. More than half of the results aren't even 280ZXs. The Datsun 280ZX is a largely forgotten survivor of the 1970s regulations that resulted in its development. And while there are fans of the car today, there are a lot of people who don't even know what a 280ZX is. But it was a sales success. It was, and remains to this day, the only Z car to ever sell more than 80,000 units in a single year. It had racing wins. Hell, the 280ZX was a transformer. I had a Blue Streak toy as a kid that I either literally loved to pieces or I bought at a garage sale already in 2 halves. Either way, Blue Streak was my favorite and probably one of the reasons I love Z cars so much today. But rusting issues resulted in a lot of 280ZXs suffering the same fate, as owners, who at the time had access to lots of parts due to the sheer glut of availability, parked their 280ZXs when they encountered an issue with the plan to get around to it, and then never actually got around to it. The sales success of the 280ZX may have actually led to its disappearance from roads. Some owners understood and appreciated their cars, but many were considered relatively cheap summer toys to drive on relaxed, carefree days. But life is not all relaxed, carefree days. So they got parked, or traded in, or trashed. By the time they started to be appreciated again, most were already gone for good. The key takeaway here, though, is that they have started to be appreciated again. A cursory glance at auto auction sites shows their average values increasing. The S130 was an 80s Z car, not in the same way as the Z31, which we'll discuss in episode 5, but as an evolutionary continuation of the S30 model. It reiterated, and I believe improved, a lot of the styling of its older siblings and introduced a lot of the technology features that its younger siblings get credited for. It's sleek and attractive, not overstated or gaudy, and not trying too hard. It is the embodiment of the period from which it came from. That is to say, that period at the beginning of a decade in which the last decade is finally perfected. The 280ZX design team was very proud of their creation. When beginning development, they defined their mission statement for the car as a harmony of society and the automobile, a harmony of the automobile and human being. As the 280ZX hit showroom floors, Matsuo wrote of that statement, "We succeeded. This success is self-evident, built into every design, function, and curve of the new 280ZX. The great technological step forward and the thoughtful economy of design seen in the 280ZX assure that it will be the sports car which will provide total owner satisfaction in the years to come." Steve Wozniak was right. The 280ZX is awesome. We opened this episode discussing that the S130 was always meant to be a transitionary car for Datsun, Nissan. And now we come to the end of that transition. Or maybe it's the beginning of another. The original plan for the next generation of the Z car was a powerful 3-liter model designed for the 1980s, with all the technological features that entailed. The 280ZX was meant as a bridge to buy the Nissan engineering team the time it needed for something totally different. Something totally radical. Hey all, I can't believe how much the channel has grown since I published episode 3 a few weeks ago. To everyone that supported me with your viewership, thank you. Reading all the wonderful comments about memories with Z cars you've had, and all the kind things you've had to say about the channel, really has kept me going. If you'd like to leave an emoji in the comments and help with the algorithm, how about a tiger face, since the 280ZX design team was driven by the philosophy that they were creating a new tiger. Special thanks to my Patreon patrons whose names you see on the screen. It's people like these folks that allow small channels like mine to be able to do this full time. They cannot be thanked enough. Remember to come join us on the Make and Model subreddit and Discord. Links in the description below. Episode 5 will be on the first of 2 generations of the 300ZX, the Z31, as we head further into the 1980s. See you then.